I'm from Media Monitoring Africa. Welcome to our first webinar of Media Freedom Festival for 2020. You know, as I guess has been most cases with many things this year, our program has taken quite a different a different way of presenting these topics and having these discussions. But we hope that what we do have is still really interesting and fruitful. And I know that we've got some excellent presenters, panelists, participants, and yeah, we're trying to make this as interesting and as engaging as possible. So really excited that we're kicking off Media Freedom Festival with looking at children's vision for our media future. I'm joined by Joanne Joseph, who will be facilitating the session today. I won't take too much of your time, Joanne. Joanne, as most of you know, is a news anchor, radio, television personality, and we're really lucky to be able to have some of your time this afternoon to join us for these important discussions. So thank you so much for doing this with us. And yeah, so I think that's it. I see that we do have a number of people joining as we go. So Joanne, over to you.
Thank you very much for that kind intro, Thandi. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. And I think you're talking about a really important topic that is also quite close to my heart. So it's really a pleasure to be along with you for this discussion. So as Thandi said, in this session, we're focusing on children's vision for our media future. Thank you to all of you who've made an attempt to be with us this afternoon. There are a couple of interesting points, I think, that need to be made on this topic. Firstly, how many of us imagine that children ought to have a vision for the future of our media, right? Many of us imagine that, you know, media is a subject on which adults mostly ought to deliberate, and yet children worldwide are now extensive users of media, whether it's television, radio, or social media, also deeply personally touched by the content on these platforms. And these, of course, shape their worldview. They shape their ideas at a particularly impressionable and formative time of their lives. But their stories also receive wide coverage, and not as wide as we would like. But we are covering them in some way or another in the media, whether they're stories of abuse, trafficking, or perhaps a smaller percentage of stories which we cover that focus on their achievements as children. But the manner in which we cover these stories as members of the media often excludes their voices partially or entirely. And questions arise out of this practice, like what is the most effective manner of covering these stories without compromising the rights of children along the way? Should we adopt the extreme stance of leaving their voices out altogether in the coverage of potentially controversial stories? Or are there ways of telling these stories which include their voices without actually jeopardizing their rights? So these are among the questions our eminent panel has been meditating upon, each in their individual way. I'm going to allow each of them a few minutes to just present their findings, and I'll simply allow them to share their thoughts on media coverage involving children. And then we're going to attempt to tackle these questions in the form of a panel discussion, in which I hope you also participate by sending some of your questions through on the Q&A section of the bar below. So let me start by introducing our first guest at this point. Media Monitoring Africa's Lister Namumba is going to do a short presentation for us on the latest monitoring results as to how children are portrayed in the media. Lister, let me hand over to you first.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for joining us. So my task today is very simple, as has been mentioned, basically looking at giving you key findings from our 2020 media monitoring of children's coverage. And I'll be presenting just the key findings. So if you could just give me a few seconds to share my screen, because I'd like, oh, okay. Seems I'm not able to.
Try again, Lester.
Okay, perfect. Let me just try again. Okay. Start now.
Sometimes technology gets the better of us, Mr. So I'm just going to give you a
You have
moment.
no idea. Oh, is there anything coming on the screen?
We're not seeing anything right now.
Nothing?
No, not at the moment.
Let me start the process again. But now. Oh, okay. Sorry to be wasting people's times, but I'm successful, hopefully now. Anything on the screen?
Not yet, Lister. I'm going to give you a moment there. I'm just going to remind her. Oh, there we go. Looks like we have something.
Oh,
There we've got something from you. Thank you. Go ahead. We're seeing your desktop at the moment.
I love the baby there.
Okay.
well,
go
we're
thank you, Lister.
talking children, so I thought I should put up the screen of a child there. Can you see a different screen now?
Yes, we can. We're seeing children in the media.
Great. That's my presentation. Hello, everyone again. Okay, so just a little bit of background before I go right in the giving you the key findings. I should mention that every year Media Monitoring Africa monitors how the media reports on children for a period of 5 months. And this year we did for the same period and monitored 12 South African online media. So another thing to mention is that we used our an MMA in-house monitoring tool to collect this data, but also had our trained and experienced media monitors to analyze each and every article that was collected. So the full report, which will be available very soon, compares data from 2016 up until 2020, and this is deliberate because we needed to show how the media has been faring. Has there been any improvement in terms of how children are portrayed in the media, or not? But then just now, now I'll only be giving you findings from our 2020 findings, and where necessary, I'll be comparing to the 2016 findings just to show you whether there's been an improvement. Okay, so in adequacy, in how many stories the children appear over the 5 monitoring period in 2020. So we had a total of 12,693 stories collected during the period, but only 1,710 of those stories were on children. So I'll repeat, 12,693 stories collected, and then only 1,710 stories on children. So when you compare to the 2016 data, you see that there's been an increase. In 2016, we had 6% coverage on children, and now we have 13%. So I guess the media is slowly grasping the need to report on children in terms of adequacy. Okay. What were the stories? What were the issues that were reported on in these stories? What were the topics? So over the 5 years, there hasn't been much change in terms of the topics that the media report on when it comes to children. And we usually have education, crime, and health usually constituting over 50% of the total coverage. And this has not changed this year. We had education at constitute 19%, crime 19%, and health 19%. So 2020, as we all know, the world has been grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic. So one would expect that health as a topic would top the list, but this was not so. We had education, and this is simply because when you look at the stories that the media were reporting on when it comes to children related to COVID-19, they were focusing on education, and this was largely as a result of the debates, discussions that were going on around closing of schools and reopening of schools. So that's why we have education topping the list. We still have crime topping, constituting the same percentage as education, and this shows that the media, the trend has not changed in that the media mostly report on crime when it comes to children. And then, of course, we have health at 14%. The full report delves into the other topics that are less covered. But for now, those are just the 3 topics that constitute over 50% of the total coverage of children. Okay, so in terms of portrayal, we had, of course, since, as I've already mentioned, we had education topping the list, but then surprisingly, we had the raw learner coming third on the list of roles at 24%. What was topping the list of roles was the raw just children, and I'll mention what that means now. And then we had, of course, the raw victim coming second at 24%. So the raw just children, while it may be argued that there's nothing wrong as portraying children as just children in coverage of them, we argue as MMA that this is not empowering in any way. I mean, if not, it actually shows media's reluctance to attach specific roles to children. And this is problematic because then we see that, it shows how the media views children as just children. So we need the media to be specific when they're reporting on children, and also especially promoting the positive roles such as, survivor, sportsman, achiever, such type of roles, so that we have roles such as victim shown or seen less in coverage. Okay, in terms of where the stories are coming from, so over the 5 years, again, this has not changed. We have stories mostly coming from Gauteng and Western Cape at 29% and 38% respectively. And these 2 provinces almost always constitute over 50% of the stories on children. So which means this leaves the remaining less than 50% to be shared among the other provinces. This means that a child or children from a province such as Mpumalanga are neglected, basically are neglected in the media because not much coverage is being done there or is coming from such provinces. So the media here, we call on the media to, diversify where they, where the stories come from. There could be reasons why the majority of stories are coming from these 2 provinces, but I will not go into those because I don't have much time. But again, the report presents that analysis. So in terms of where the children are speaking, we have between 2016 and 2020, we've actually seen a decrease. So while the number of stories has increased from 6% to 13% between 2016 and 2020, we've had the number of stories that have children's voices decrease. This is from 12% in 2016 to a mere 7% in 2020. This means that the 93% of stories remaining had adults speaking on behalf of the children or had no voice at all. And this is problematic because it shows that the media is accessing children less and less. And this could be because the majority of stories are negative and the media is maybe being cautious to not access children. But then it's just, it's not an encouraging situation where you have voices of children decrease to, almost double. So the media here need to pull up the socks and access children more. And of course, here there could be issues of maybe the media, like I said, is being cautious to not access children, for instance, in stories that are talking about abuse. But we believe as MMA that there are creative ways that the media can go about this. So if, for instance, a journalist is reporting on on a case maybe where a child was abused, we don't ask them to interview that particular the child that's involved in that story, but they can of course get views from other children on what they think about abuse in South Africa or how they want it to be addressed. So there are a lot of creative ways that the media can go about getting children to speak in coverage of them so that this number goes up. Okay. In terms of rights, children's rights and coverage, so I should mention that when we're doing the monitoring, we look at children's rights to participation, freedom of expression, privacy, and dignity. And here, the promotion of the rights of these rights has reduced from 49% recording in 2016 to a mere 6% in 2020. This is a very sad picture, because it's actually a setback, in the fight for children's coverage in the media in terms of adequacy and ethics, and also the promotion of their rights. So a situation where we have stories, only 6% of stories respecting or promoting these rights is very sad. I can go, I can delve into this deeper, but again, I invite people to read the full report, which will be shared, which will be distributed. Okay, in terms of gender portrayal or gender representation, so kudos here. The media is doing a commendable job in trying to achieve an equitable representation of the two genders, of boys and girls in coverage. In 2020, we had girls receive 55% and boys receive a coverage of 45%. And usually between 2016 and 2020, this has not changed, where we usually have a margin or a difference of about 5%, 3% coverage. So again, the media is doing a very good job here in terms of gender representation. However, the problem comes in when you look at the type of stories where the boys appear and where the girls appear. So you have a lot of, over the 5 years, we've seen a lot of stories on crime featuring girls as victims and boys in crime as perpetrators. And then also, maybe education, where you have a lot of girls appearing, and this is good. But then having a certain, maybe boys only appear in certain, continue to only appear in certain types of stories, perpetuate certain stereotypes. And so we always call on the media to be cautious in how they portray the boys and girls in different coverage of them. So, but again, I will not take away from the fact that they're doing a commendable job in terms of equitable representation of boys and girls. Okay, so when we're doing our monitoring, we also look at the quality of information that these stories on children have. And I should mention that what we mean when we say quality of information, we're asking questions whether the story was context-based or whether it was in-depth. Was it discussing, was it presenting causes? Was it discussing relevant policies and legislation? Was it providing self-help information? Was it providing solutions? That sort of thing. So we're always looking at the type of information that the stories have. And like I said, 2020, the world has been facing the COVID-19 pandemic. And during this period, actually, we saw a lot of coverage on child abuse stories or gender-based, violence, and also the announcements or the reporting saying that these two vices had recorded a high during the national lockdown that the pandemic brought. But then one would expect that most of these stories would, discuss relevant policies or offer self-help information. But then this was not so, and so we ended up having only 3% of stories discussing policies and 0% offering self-help information. I should mention though that the 0% does not mean that we had zero stories that had self-help information. It just means that the number of stories that offered this information were not significant enough to make it to 1%. So this is very discouraging, because when you're reporting on child abuse or gender-based violence, again, as, for example, you need to have information on how children can the sort of help that they can seek, or how they can avoid being falling prey to such vices, and also just discussing relevant policies. For instance, what is the government doing to address gender-based violence, to address child abuse? If they're not doing anything, then at least question why they're not doing anything. So we need to have more stories that are digging deeper and providing such relevant information, because the children need to be empowered, and also coverage need to go just beyond providing context, basic, answering the 5 Ws and 1H. So with these findings, clearly we can see that the media still has a long way to report on children, and we argue as MMA that we implore the media to get it right now when it comes to reporting on children. So in terms of adequacy, in terms of ethics, and in terms of in terms of getting children to speak in coverage of them, because if this is not done, then South Africa might end up, being a country with children who will be adults, who are, not participating, or are afraid to participate, or are not empowered enough to participate in discussions, or involving them, or affecting them, or maybe not even eager to participate in, for instance, democratic processes. So the media needs to get it right, because we cannot afford to have less than 15% of stories report on children and then portray them largely as victims. Okay, so if anybody needs information about any of these findings, or our monitoring, they can get in touch with me at mr.r@mma.org.za, or get in touch with my colleague Musa at musa@mma.org.za. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Lister. And I think that research is so important, and it's really going to form an important basis for the discussion that we're about to have in just a short while. So thank you so much for that. Our next participant is Communications Specialist at UNICEF South Africa office, Sudarshan Reddy. Sudarshan's worked for the United Nations since 2000. And over the past 20 years, he's worked on a broad range of campaigns and initiatives focusing on child protection, human rights issues, including racism, xenophobia, and homophobia. He's also undertaken short-term assignments focusing on communication, advocacy, and outreach for the United Nations in Angola, Zambia, Eritrea, Lesotho, and Indonesia. Welcome, Sudarshan. Over to you next. I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself, please, Sudarshan.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you. Yes,
no matter how often we do these calls, we'll still do the muting thing wrong. So
indeed.
Thank you for this opportunity, and to Media Monitoring Africa and my fellow panelists. It's great to be here. And really, I have to comment Media Monitoring Africa for having this initiative to begin with, because the events of the 19th of October 1977 are seldom spoke of. And Media Freedom Week reminds us of the need to never be complacent. So thank you for that. And thank you for also making children the focus of today's session, because as you said, Joanne, at the beginning, we sometimes ignore children while talking about them. So this is very encouraging. For UNICEF, we're guided by the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC. Promulgated in 1989, it is the single most ratified human rights convention in the world. It's also the first convention that was signed by the post-apartheid government in 1995. So that gives you an idea of its significance globally and nationally. And Article 17 of the CRC, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, says that media is able to change negative behavior and is able to open the minds of children. Children have the right to get information from the internet, radio, TV, newspapers, books, and other sources. Adults should make sure the information they are getting is not harmful. Governments should encourage the media to share information from lots of different sources in languages that children can understand. That's a slightly simplified version of the text, but it does remind us that this guiding light on children's rights specifically mentions the right to information and the role of media. When we speak about the rights and the condition of children, too often it can be done in a patronizing way, a slightly condescending manner. And for want of a better word, it can be somewhat tokenistic. At UNICEF, we have tried to evolve how we've worked on this issue. So when there's a discussion or an event specifically around children's rights that we're hosting, we would endeavor to get a cross-section of children to participate, but participate with their own voice, not in a scripted way. And I think some of us have been at functions, events, initiatives where we've heard speakers, sometimes child speakers, where it is clearly not the voice of the children that come through. So it's very, very important that in the work we do, we move beyond tokenism. That's absolutely vital. It's also important that their voices are heard meaningfully. And I'll give you an example. The reopening of the schools in South Africa recently was contentious, still is contentious, and there was considerable and much needed media coverage on it. There was the voices of the unions. There were the voices of the Department of Basic Education. One heard the voices of parents and policymakers. Very seldom did one hear the voices of children themselves, the learners who are at home and for whatever reason, good or bad, may or may not want to return to school. It would have been certainly compelling to hear their voices. I'm not saying they were completely silent, but a cursory glance at media coverage, and it's not just in South Africa. My colleagues in other UNICEF offices have picked up the same. One didn't get a sense that their voices were being heard. Having said that, there has been noticeable improvement in the interest that media has displayed in the condition, plight, rights of children. And I've noticed it personally, having joined UNICEF in 2014, just the amount of interest from media on issues pertaining to, for instance, violence against children is noticeable. So it was telling that in the report that Lister quoted, it was telling that stories on children have increased from 6% to 13% from 2016 to 2020. So that's something that we should perhaps be cognizant of and be encouraged by. Generally, media interest in children in the past has, for UNICEF, focused on a few key events: Child Protection Week in May, and the 60 Days of Activism of No Violence Against Women and Children in November. So those were the two peak days when there was intense media interest, and for the rest of the year, not as much. That is evolving. I find just in the last few weeks, for instance, when we talk about the impact of this pandemic, there have been questions about what about the nutrition of children? How have children been affected by the closure of schools, children that receive their meal as part of the government feeding scheme? There are questions that are even sometimes more nuanced, and a media interest that goes beyond nutrition is just about starvation and hunger. We're fielding interviews on the impact of stunting and wasting on young children, on the need for breastfeeding above infant formula, on the importance of highlighting obesity among young children. And South Africa has among the highest obesity rates in the world for kids, certainly among the highest in Africa for sure. So what I'm trying to say is that we are seeing a positive progression, that there is actually a keen and acute interest in the impact of so many of these issues on children. But is there room for improvement? Absolutely. When we talk about xenophobia, the voices of young children in South Africa should be brought up too. They should be given coverage. When we talk about the impact of refugee rights, we should be hearing about the condition and speak to migrant children and refugee children. There are many in South Africa. When we talk about the rights of the disabled or differently abled, there are children's voices that should be heard as well. And similarly, when we speak about the rights of sexual minorities or the LGBTIAQ community, once again, the voices of children are seldom heard. So that is something we all need to collectively work on. UNICEF has, through various initiatives, tried to do this, but we could be doing a lot more like everybody else. We've worked with the Children's Radio Foundation in the past and continue to on other programs to train what are called young reporters who can talk about the stories in their own communities and amplify the voices of children themselves. What we've tried to do is ensure that these young reporters are present at many initiatives as possible. So they're not just recipients of information, but they also craft the messaging that should be sent out there. And also, while avoiding tokenism, we must also avoid looking at the children as some sort of homogeneous block, or the youth as a uniform bunch of like-minded people. Of course, it's a microcosm of the broader society. So that's perhaps something we need to also reflect in popular media, that young people and children are as diverse as the rest of society, and their diverse voices should be heard. At UNICEF, we've also worked on how we depict children. So there were jokes made in the past. I know Trevor Noah said something once about UNICEF have these malnourished children in famine-stricken countries, and that's what they do to raise money. That may have been the case a long time ago, but it's not the situation anymore. And from our office, we work very closely with all our partners to ensure that the depiction of children is dignified, contextual, and nuanced, and that we don't revert to these very tired stereotypes that were spoken about earlier. And I'd like to conclude by just reiterating what Lista said earlier in her presentation, which is that the media needs to get it right. However, a caveat, it's not just the media, it's all of us, and we do it together. The onus is on all of us, as UNICEF, as Media Monitoring Africa, as perhaps everybody on this call, to facilitate engagement with media on these issues, to make it accessible and understandable on why the narrative sometimes needs to change, and why we need to increase, despite the commendable increase from 6% to 13%, we could do a lot more. So perhaps we'll find out some more in the course of this discussion and hear more about how we can do that. And I look forward to an invigorating discussion thereafter. Thank you.
Great pleasure to have you on the panel, Sudesh. And you've already brought so much with your knowledge of what has happened in your role as UNICEF ambassador here on our panel discussion today. I'm going to tap into some of your lovely thoughts you shared with us as we move towards that panel discussion. Tamano Makadi joins us next. Tamano is an award-winning South African journalist with 23 years of active practice in the media. He has hosted and produced a variety of radio and television programs, mostly with the SABC and ENCA. He's currently a broadcast specialist lecturer at Tshwane University of Technology in the journalism department there. Tamano is a council member of the South African National Editors Forum as well. He heads up the Education and Training Committee, more specifically within SANEF. Tamano, let me hand it over to you next. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Joanne and colleagues. Thank you so much. Much appreciation really to MMA for organizing this. We are truly grateful, and I think this is quite an important discussion, particularly around children. So my observation of how children have been covered in South Africa over the last couple of years is that indeed, as South Africa, we have one of the best legislation and protection of children in the media globally, so to speak. But on the ground, the situation seems to be a little bit different on how they are covered. And I'll take you probably just through some of the practical examples of what I have observed. Now, as we've heard from the research that was presented earlier, children are not covered well enough, and their voices are not being heard. And I think there's a need for us to improve in that particular area. So when I listened, if you just look at the period 2016 to 2020, only improving from 6% to 13%, I would like to argue that perhaps maybe those numbers have changed as a result of COVID-19, because there were a lot of talks around children, mainly because of schools and other issues that relates to children. So overall, those numbers, one would expect that they would be even much better compared to what we have just heard. Now, it is also correct to say, in most cases, children are portrayed as victims. I think there's a need to listen to them, hear their voices. What is it that can be done to improve the way in which we have been reporting around children? And I think media carries a part of that responsibility. There was a recent case, and I'm sure some of us, we may have seen a story that was doing the rounds where learners at school were fighting. Part of what I see as a problem, it's also on how it has more to do with how we educate community. Now, to have a 16-year-old or somebody who is even younger than 16 portrayed, especially in the social media space, beating the other learner or the one that is been beaten. Obviously, some might even argue the fact that they would want to bring some of the some of these incidents to the attention of authorities. In this case, the story was happening in Gauteng, where the MEC of Health was also tagged. I also understand that the Department of Basic Education was also tagged in that tweet. But my argument here is that whilst all of that is happening, it is the victim that is going to suffer the most as a result of those pictures that are going to be played throughout the entire time, whether these things are also shared even on WhatsApp, but in this particular regard, we've seen most of that on WhatsApp. But my proposal is that media plays an important role as well, just to try and educate our communities, get them to understand the impact that such incidents may have. It is correct to say you'd want to bring that to the attention of authorities, but it is done at the same time at the expense of the very same person you are trying to correct. So those are just some of the highlights that I thought I would just bring forward. Now, in most cases, and these are just part of my observation, when facts have not been fully established or gathered, the media sort of find itself in a very tight corner. I mean, there are issues of consent, for example, where you would need to, get the permission. Either from the child or or from the parents to speak to the child, depending on what the story is really about. So in most cases, you find that people are chasing after deadlines. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge when you now have to adhere to some of these rules, but on the one hand, you have a deadline which you are trying to chase. So a number of times, kids are also compromised by the very same people that are supposed to be protecting them. So my take is that a lot still needs to be done. As we've just heard from those numbers, I'm rather glad that when you talk about the year 2020, you made a comparison between girls and boys, 45%, 55%. But the one concerning number for me, as I'm trying to go back to my notes taken from the earlier presentation, the 2016 percentage 6% to 2020, 13%. One would expect that a lot more could have been done, well, I guess our colleagues in the media space, those that are listening at this point, they will also try and do something about it. But let me also just say this from our side as the South African National Editors Forum, through the committee which I chair, the E&T. These are some of the issues that we have been deeply concerned about, and we are doing everything possible to come up with programs that will address, rather seek to address some of these challenges. And I am quite convinced that with the cooperation of our colleagues in the media space, we will be able to find one another. So thank you so much indeed, Joanne.
Thank you very much for that, Zamano. That was really excellent to hear from your perspective, someone who's been working actively in the media industry and has now taken that knowledge into the teaching space as well. Let me introduce award-winning journalist Thomas Byrd next. He recently won Media Monitoring Africa's Cliche Awards, and prior to founding Habari Kibra, Thomas worked at Pamoja FM for 9 years as news editor and health reporter. He holds a BA in Mass Communication from Mount Kenya University, with awards like the CNN Multi-Choice in 2013, Internews Storyfest 2012, and Children Legal Action Network under his belt. Thomas brings a wealth of journalism experience to the Habari Kibra team, which he is sharing with us today. Thomas, please share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Am I clear from my end?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. It's a pleasure to join the team. Nairobi is quite chilly today. It's been raining since last evening. The weather has just changed, but we thank God for everything. And I'm happy to be on this platform. Basically, just to share a bit of my experience that I've had an interest about children reporting for the last about 4 years now. And last year, at least I was one of the winners of the Isle Award. And that has just encouraged me to do more stories from my end. But maybe just tips to share with the journalists on this platform is that it's good to have voices of the children like display like in our stories, because like in most cases, like even like the team has shared from South Africa, like I'm seeing that yes, as much as we are trained to do more about children reporting, we are still experiencing gaps in how we give voices of children like in our storytelling. And for example, like a very good example, like in Kenya, during this COVID time, we had a story about like the sort of teen pregnancies in Kenya in one of the counties called Machakos County. And the way it was portrayed like in the mainstream media and just like in the media is that girls were at fault. It was the problem because they were at home, they're not accessing like healthcare services, they're not accessing sanitary pads, and they fell prey to become expectant, like unplanned pregnancies. But we had less voices of the girls just to share the experiences, because like Randy has shared, like you don't have to interview the victim, but you can give a voice to another source who can just like share the experiences to say, yes, this is our take, this is what we feel, maybe in terms of policies that can happen in our country, for example. This is what we feel maybe in terms of parenting skills can change. So I didn't get to see that, especially like how our friends reported like this story. And even just like rape cases that happen like in the slums, like because I work in Kibera slums, like you find that a story has happened, like there was a child who was abused sexually with a teacher who was currently like undertaking like a tuition program during the holidays because kids are not going to school. And allegedly the teacher is said to have raped the girl. But then when the media got to know about this, they were rushing to the scene. They want to interview the girl. They want to interview the parent. But for me, I'm like, I took it so I'm like, hey guys, wait a minute. The girl is just like, she's not like herself now. Please don't rush to interview her. Just give her some time to overcome this experience because it was a bad experience. Maybe talk to the parent, maybe talk to some friends, talk to the neighbors, get to hear what they take. But all they wanted was like, oh, let's hear from this source. Let's hear from the horse's mouth. And not considering that, yes, she is a child. She's traumatized. She needs time to cool down from this experience. And also the parents were still confused, like this had happened to their daughter. Yeah. So basically for me, maybe some tips I'll give is that I think from our day-to-day happenings, like in our communities, because I know we also have almost similar experiences like in Kenya and South Africa. Like just look around you. You know, what are the issues, like, you know, the health issues. Rennie has shared about the impact of COVID, like in terms of maybe nutrition, for example, breastfeeding, obesity, because I know kids have been staying at home for the last 7 months, like in Kenya, for example, and parents were forced to incur an extra cost because they have to feed these children, they need to eat. And if this was maybe not measured in a way, especially kids like who are coming from these well-off families, maybe they got obesity, for example, or it's also vice versa, like kids who are coming from poor families that could not afford like revenue streams because they lost their income. They might have gotten a stunned growth, meaning that the growth has now slowed down, and maybe the parent has not even noticed this. Like, you know, what is the impact of this child economically for the country? In the next 5 years from now, in the next 10 years from now, if we have a child who has a stunned growth, what is the impact for the economy? And perhaps how much will we spend also to take this child to the facility, because we'll need to take her to maybe to a hospital. That means we have to incur costs if we don't have an insurance cover, for example. So if we just look around us, I know we can get ideas. And even from the story that I did about the gaps that kids had, especially from Kibera and one of the slums called Korogosho slums, the story was just about the gaps kids have when it comes to play. Because the cities are growing every day. There's less infrastructure in terms of the spaces, green spaces, like they've shrunk every day. And kids are not getting enough space to play. So for me, I looked at it like, okay, fine. What impact does it have on a child? For example, if my child can be able to play soccer at age, say, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they're not playing anymore because there are no spaces to play, it means if my child had a talent to play maybe soccer or a sport, that talent it's gone forever. They'll never play, we'll never see their potential. Even if they went to a good school or maybe a high school or university, that will be too late for them because it starts in their early years to nurture their talent, to nurture their motivation. So that's the story that I did in the two slums. And something that has come out even positively, even after the story that has been won the award last year, even though it took time. So like in the Kibera community, we have a youth group that has just come up with a program where just kids just go to play. So they started like with rugby, and now they've been doing other more creative like sports, like they're doing like some artwork, and just allowing just kids to express themselves, like, you know, through like community murals. And even I've seen some of them like even just do community murals about COVID-19. Like they're working through the community, like on the posters, on this electrical poles, just write like, hey, please wear a mask. Oh, please, COVID is real. Wash your hands, you know, be safe. You see, so for me, I'm positive that even from the story that happened like last year, the community is starting to embrace to say, oh yes, we need to start having this discussion as a community. Like it's time to create spaces for our children to play enough, because it will improve their early years and also their milestone in school, not just in school alone, but also like in the homesteads. And then maybe perhaps for the young people who are also listening, that also try to be consistent with your reporting, because it also helps people to understand like this is what we produce every week. For example, just say our media is producing like a story per week. So let our audiences understand that, hey, we have a story about children like every Monday at this time. So be consistent, don't stop. Just keep on sharing those stories, and also just ask the public, hey, but hey, what story do you want us to share about children? Even just talking to the children themselves, they'll tell you, oh, you know what? we rarely hear about what we say. This is what I will want to see on TV. This is what I want to be told about a child. Yeah, I think those are the tips that I had for today, and we can still engage more, even on email or on the social media platform. Thank you.
Thomas, thank you so much for that. And in fact, we will be engaging with you a little bit more during our panel discussion. So thank you so much for sharing your personal experience there. Standing by to address us next is Arilyn Mccain. She's the Director of Global Youth and News Media. Arilyn has worked to get news media to better serve the young and to help them learn about quality journalism for more than 20 years, working in more than 70 countries. She continues to work as a journalist in France and the United States, and she's taught journalism students in those places, as well as Bulgaria. More recently, she founded the Global Youth and News Media Prize and organized a World Teenage Reporting Project on COVID-19 that had teenage journalists all over the world, including South Africa, cover the untold stories of how their peers were making a difference during the pandemic. Let's hear from you next, Arilyn. Welcome.
Okay, I'll share my screen here. Get a presenter view. Are you seeing the screen, everyone?
You can see it. Thank you, Arilyn.
Okay, I am delighted to be with you. I'm in Paris right now, and I'll just quickly go over some things that I was struck by when I got the results of the report. First of all, you are not alone, and you are ahead of many in terms of how coverage is dealt with in South Africa. For example, I'm going to tell you about some global strategies that seem to fit with what you're doing by encouraging good work, which you're already doing, by doing it yourself, which you're already doing, and training future journalists and the citizens they work with. South Africa is not alone in its coverage problems. Finland, which is often presented as the Mecca of everything that is good with everything, they've got some problems. It got worse over the last 3 decades in terms of coverage. Specifically, in 2017, less than a third of stories about children had children's voices in them, as opposed to in 2007, it had been almost half. So you're not doing badly compared to the rest of the world. South Africa has ideas to emulate, and I've seen that throughout the years. I can go on and on about the things I've seen in South Africa that have worked in other places. For example, I love MMA's Mad and Glad designations of the news as it goes along. I've not seen that anywhere else, and it's certainly something I'm going to tell other people about. I love your awards with the best story ideas covering children, and then you provide a jury of organizers and children, and the best thing is you give cash support to do the story. I've not seen that anywhere else, and it's a great idea to get the bosses interested in this, because if you give them some money, they might actually do it. There's a cool variation of that in France. It's called the Stop au Cliche contest. And that is a similar idea, but it's after the stories are done. It's a youth jury, and there are 4 awards per year. What's interesting about that is they present the awards to educators each year, so that gets the word out. This year and last year, we did a Global Youth and News Media Prize that had a category for journalism involving the young. And it was a similar idea of encouraging when news organizations take young people seriously. This was the initial laureate. It was the student newspaper at a high school in Parkland, Florida, that worked together with the Guardian US, and they turned over the coverage of this big demonstration to the kids. So the live coverage was done by these teenagers who knew the topic better than anybody, because as some of you may remember, they experienced gun violence in their school. Another one was a related story. The victims of violence we hear about a lot. We know they are victims, but we don't know their stories. So the Trace in Chicago, this are two US examples, covered the stories of the 1,200 kids who had been killed due to gun violence to put a human face behind that violence. I love what MMA is doing in your Getting to Grips webinars. That's another idea I'm going to pass along to other people. As you know, that has experts and young people talking about and asking questions about and taking questions from the audience about news issues. Now that's a webinar, but that could easily in South Africa and elsewhere become a news program, which is exactly what happened again in the United States. It was the nightly news. They created a kids edition around COVID. It involved an expert, a doctor down on the left, answering kids' questions that came in. Any country could do that, and it's timely, and it's something that can be done very simply with a webinar, as we just saw, or become part of the national broadcasting. It was mentioned that we also did a COVID-19 How Teens Are Helping Teenage Reporting project. The reason we did that, and I got bugged by the business as usual, and we know this in every single country, that children are generally portrayed as victims and teenagers are generally portrayed as a problem, as perpetrators. And this was the case. I noticed this earlier in the coverage. And so I did my own search in English of just a Google search on teenagers and COVID-19 and teenagers and coronavirus. I did it in French for France, where I am, and for the UN in English, which covered a lot of places. More than 95% of the stories portrayed them as needing help, annoying parents, or acting as perpetrators. Even the well-meaning stories tended to portray young people as a problem, as always a problem. There was one exception. A kid in the Northwest created the first tracking software to have really accurate numbers on this. So there was like one major story that was not about children as victims. So the challenge was for teenage journalists to cover stories about how their peers were making a difference during the pandemic. This is a solutions journalism approach with young people involved, rather than just seeing them as a problem. And as it turned out, we ended up with 60 stories by teenage reporters in 19 countries. South Africa, we've heard about the Children's Radio Foundation. They were one of the participants. The point of this is we tend to concentrate on the problems of children rather than concentrating on what they can do, how they can contribute, and also getting teenage reporters to do that kind of reporting, which is a very forceful and powerful experience. Journalism students can also build the way of better understanding young people. For example, they can learn about covering younger audiences. In a simple journalism class, they can report stories that they think will be of interest to 11-year-olds, for example, and then have an 11-year-old class criticize that. It's a real eye-opener because we think our stories about young people are serving them, but many times they aren't at all. Editors can learn better about appealing to the young by a very simple exercise. Change their front page so that it appeals to an 11-year-old or a 10-year-old. This was one in Chicago that did that. I encourage you to do that in radio broadcast and an online, in television. When you do it, it's quite an eye-opener. And then show it to children, show them the two front pages or the two newscasts or the two versions of the story, and it's quite a shock. And often the adults have the same reaction. So the key thing about appealing to young people is getting the audience involved, doing news for them, not to them, and doing real news. Kids don't live on Mars. They know about the bad things in the world, but do it in a way that's accessible, sticking to the facts, making items shorter, explaining hard words, writing normal headlines, using color, explaining photos. When people who do that in print and online, they find that the entire audience appreciates it. And doing that with children, this will lead into, I'll talk about later, some of the notions of takeovers that are eye-openers for everybody. By having children come in and work with paper. And the nice thing about paper is that it's slow. You can also do this with online and with film, but when you look at paper, they can see and touch, and you can do it anywhere. You can do it in the poorest place or the richest place. Also, I think we need to teach journalism students early about covering younger audiences. What you learn in journalism school tends to be the basis for what you're doing elsewhere. And I think one of the coolest things that I've seen is having journalism students take their expertise and go to primary and secondary schools to talk to students about journalism and about how a journalist approaches digital information. What that does is it reinforces the journalism students' information, and also by teaching kids, journalists, teaching kids about approaching digital information like a reporter takes the fear out of that activity. They can also just teach them about how to take a picture. It's a good way to start that conversation before you get to the tougher subjects. So in brief, South Africa is not alone in the problems of coverage. You are ahead of many people thanks to MMA, and also I think thanks to the fact that MMA works with the other players, UNICEF and the media themselves. You may think that's normal. That's not normal. There are only a couple of other countries that have that kind of camaraderie around this problem. Doing it yourself, so you're doing, encouraging good work that you do by the contests that you're doing, bravo, do more of them. Doing it yourself, I think you could expand the way you treat news for kids. There could be a news show for kids. It's hard to do, but it can be done very well. You've already got the motto in that, in those webinars. And training future journalists in a little bit different way to have them be involved with people younger than they are early on. They'll learn from that. The young people will learn from that because a reporter is cool. I don't care where you are. People complain about the media, but to a kid, being a reporter is very cool. So send those young journalists into classes. I know journalists are coming into classes. Kate already let me know about that, and it happens in many countries, but send those young ones in too. That's it. Thank you.
Lovely ideas there, Aaron, and thank you so much for your contribution there. I think we've got quite a lot, I suppose, that we've started implementing, and thanks for that positive spin on it, because we certainly have made a dent in some of those challenges, and I hope that incorporating some of what you've been able to share with us, we can move forward with a little bit more intention, perhaps, in the next few years. So I'm going to kick off the panel.
Finish. I'm taking those ideas for elsewhere. You do great stuff. It's going to go elsewhere. Thank you. Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and I do appreciate your contribution there. So let's move into the panel discussion now. I'm going to ask our panelists to turn on their cameras, even if your mic is not on right now because you're not answering at a particular time. Let's be able to see all of you. Fantastic, thank you. We've got Chamano there, we've got Arilyn, Sedation, and we've got Thomas as well. So I'm going to kickstart with you, Chamano, first of all, because I want to know, I mean, this comment that was made earlier by Lister during her coverage of or her explanation of the research into the coverage of children in South Africa, she mentioned that media mostly report on crime in relation to children. I want to tackle that with you in just a moment. I just want to remind our panelists we are a little short of time, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers very succinct, please, and let's try and get as much subject matter covered in this time as we can. So Tamano, media mostly reporting on crime in relation to children. Can we actually get away from that in South Africa? Isn't it a reality that we simply can't escape in many ways?
Yeah, so I think a lot of reports, I think over the years, we have just seen most of our reports been really crime-based. And I would like to believe that there's a whole lot of stories that can be told around children beyond crime. But I think it comes with, you know, this understanding that we've got to be interested in children, as issues, because here we're talking about the future of the country, and it is also important to try and sort of get them engaged. I'm really interested in what Arlene was talking about and the examples she shared with us about teaching them, whether they had been taught by journalism students at that very early age. So what you're basically doing, you're building a culture, because there is just so much more you can tell around children. We don't have to wait for the day when a child is missing, when there's a robbery at home, and so that we can then make it part of our headlines. So I think there's just really so much more that can be done, but it's a responsibility that we all have to take. And I believe in the South African context, it is possible. And people like ourselves, just as I said, at SANEF as ENT, we should be advocating for some of these things. And I can certainly say this is something that we will do.
Thomas, let me bring you in here. I mean, one of the concerns that Lister cited was this tendency that South African media have to report on children in a very generic way. So we don't highlight them as individuals with individual circumstances or a context or even particular abilities, for example, or difficulties. We're talking about them as one kind of homogeneous lump, really, without those distinguishing features. Now you've told stories in a very different way. You have personalized these stories of children. How does one go about remembering that when producing those stories?
Thank you so much. I think from my perspective is that we need to do research, thorough research, just look at what is happening around you, and then also talk to these children, because they have a lot to share. They don't get a chance to just share the experiences, just to share their stories, just to share, how they feel about how we tell their stories from their perspective. So if we get to personalize their stories, I think that can be a better way on how we can amplify their voices, but in a more dignified manner. Yes.
Let me bring you in here, Sudarshan. I mean, particular provinces appear to neglect the coverage of children more than others. Where do we begin to even educate journalists in those provinces about the kind of stories they should be covering in regard to children and how they should go about covering them as well?
Certainly. I think, Joanne, it's partly a provincial issue, but it's also a national issue. It's a global issue. I'd also think that the discrepancies with such coverage do change from time to time. For instance, if you have a particularly horrific case of a really horrific case of violence against a child in the Northern Cape, suddenly you will see a spike of coverage around that incident. And that's going to somehow skew some of your findings. So I do think these things are too often events driven. I think Arlen made a point earlier about not just focusing on the problems of children, but also hearing the voices of children and hearing about opportunities and positive stories. We know the adage, if it bleeds, it leads, but I think we also need to move away from that. I think there is a concerted effort with some media. So yes, to come back to simplify it, we do need to do that sort of training, and perhaps we could look at certain provinces. But sometimes it's just about resources, under-resourced newsrooms, as you well know, worked in media. A tiny staff working on a particular newspaper or broadcasting medium who have to do pretty much everything. So the issues of children are going to go slightly to the back burner, which is not what it should be, but it does happen. And so certain sensationalist issues take dominance, and the issues around children are seen as a second tier. And sometimes, not always, it's simply because there's not enough resources or capacity or perhaps training. So yes, we do have a job to do, and it's one that we should perhaps commit to doing today. Thank you.
Aaron, let me bring you in here based on something that Sudarshan has just triggered for me, and that's about the voices of children that don't feature as much as they should in stories about them. You've got lots of adults speaking on their behalf, but very few children having their own voices in those stories. Now, I want to present you with the dilemma of a cultural phenomenon in our country and potentially on our continent, where perhaps when you're working in the United States or in France, it might potentially be easier to get some of the children to speak out on issues that affect them. But in our part of the world, you're often as a child constrained by cultural limitations that may actually encode you to believe that children must be seen and not heard in particular situations. I mean, how do we learn to give our children the same kind of voice that children in other parts of the world enjoy?
I would not presume to be an expert on South African culture, so I will try just not to sound stupid in this particular segment. I think what I've seen in other countries where children are very modest and are taught to be very quiet, when they are in a group, they're stronger. When they are in a protected space, they're stronger. When they can produce something themselves and then see it given amplification, that reinforces the idea that they do have a voice. But I think it needs to be, in most countries, a kind of a safe space. In the next segment, I had some things to show you about takeovers, how children do journalistic takeovers in various news organizations. And that's a safe space that helps give them confidence to be able to say something. But nobody likes to be the only person quizzed about the trauma they just went through. Nobody likes that. So I think we are asking a lot of children to ask them to do that. So I think that that may not be possible, but I think that's, I would say, the safe space option for children. They deserve that.
Some beautiful thoughts there, Arilyn, and perhaps Thomas can expand on this for us, because Thomas, you've gone into areas like the Kibera slums and you've actually given children who would otherwise have been invisible a voice. What does that change for them? Well, once they have seen themselves reflected in some kind of media, does it change the way they feel about themselves? Does it give them more confidence to speak out in the future? Just unmute yourself, please, Thomas.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. So the kids that I've interacted with, like in the slums, especially Kibera and Korogosho, like they've really gotten some self-confidence. And even like they're going back home and telling their parents, like, hey, mom, dad, you need to listen to me. I also have a voice. And the one interesting thing that one of the parents was telling me about their child was that they call me Teacher Thomas now, like they see me as a teacher. Like, hey, Teacher Tom, you know what? Like the other day we had a discussion, like my child sat us down as parents and told us, hey, mom, dad, can we have family rules? You guys never had, you have never given us a chance to express ourselves. So the kids were like telling dad, okay, dad, you come home drunk, so please don't come home drunk. Mom, you only buy good dresses for yourself, please. Can you also consider us? And they had a discussion, they had a meeting, and they had family rules, and they're hung behind a kitchen door. So for me, that was like very inspirational. And actually, it's also one of the stories that I'm thinking to do about now. Like, just how kids can come out of their spaces that with us as parents think like, oh, they don't have a voice. They're just supposed to be there and told, you do this, you do this, you do this, we just point a finger to them. But when we just take a backseat and listen to them, they have so much to tell us as a society. And even for policymakers, they have a lot to tell us. Yes.
So Thomas, based on what you've just told us, you've reminded me that we actually have a video to play, which we were going to play a little bit later on, but I think it syncs very well with what you were saying. We had a conversation with a couple of children about the issue of their representation. So I think we should actually play that right now.
Oh, awesome.
I'm not hearing the audio. I don't know if anybody else is.
Yeah, we're just waiting to hear the audio on this.
Is the audio not that loud?
we're not able to hear it at this stage, Namshado.
Okay, let me just try that again.
I think that it's important that children get the required coverage in the media. And so having only 13% of children's stories in the news, I think that, you know, we're making headway. We're slowly, I think, getting to a place where we can have more children. And I don't think it's enough. And I think, you know, we have to build it, especially for positive stories. And I'm not really talking about negative stories here, but there's so many children in the country who are doing amazing things and who are helping communities around South Africa, around the world. And there's so many children who have their own point of view on many issues that normally adults kind of overlook and say, well, no, they're just children. What do they know? And so I think that we need to have more coverage. And even if we could put it up to maybe 20%, I think it would be enough, because at the moment, I don't think we are giving children the right amount of positive coverage in the media at the moment.
Speak more to children when reporting on them. Yes, I do, because I feel like if since children's voices aren't really put on the media anymore, people don't really know how we think things through or how we process different situations. And I also feel that sometimes people actually want to see what we think about a situation, or people actually want to hear our opinions on how a certain situation can be dealt with or improved. And then here are some of the reasons why I think that children's voices aren't really on the media anymore. Firstly, privacy. Some parents might want to keep their children on the down low, or some children might just want to stay private and not really expose themselves to the media. And then another reason is that the way the children are approached, because if a child is approached in a way that the journalist or the interviewer is intimidating or is scary to them, then the child won't really be in a comfortable environment and they won't really be confident in their opinion or answer. So then they won't really give out the best answer that they can give to the media. But I feel like if the child is approached in a kind manner and like the vibes are just chill and it's just relaxed, then obviously the child is going to be in a comfortable environment and they're going to start to be confident in their answers and just overall give their best opinion or answer that they can give. And then the second question, do I think that it's okay for the media to violate children's rights? No, I don't think it's okay, because that's honestly unfair. It's unfair to us children, because yes, we have rights, and yes, we might not always know what those rights mean or how we're supposed to use those rights, but that still doesn't give the media the right to violate our rights. And I also feel that violating our rights is just honestly disrespectful, because us as children, we don't really violate adults' rights. So it's honestly not understandable why they're doing that to us. I feel like every child should have a right to a right, even if we don't understand what it means, or even if we misuse it. The media still can't really violate our rights, because that's honestly unfair to us children. And that's what I think of both the questions.
What kind of different media would I like to see in the future? Well, I would like to see some really different types of media. Something that we don't see with children often is in radio voiceover work and a lot of audio content. So while we may see a lot of children news in the newspapers, I would like to definitely see some voiceover kind of stuff, radio, maybe podcasting work, children's stories, and expertise and what they are enjoying at school, etc. Possibly even maybe showing on the news, which is often not done too much.
All right, so that gives you an idea of what children are thinking about. So it's unfortunately, many of them are writing exams now. That was why we had to record their little insert and we were not able to have them live. I just want to wrap with one final question. Perhaps I'll throw this to you, Sudarshan, for some idea on this. The issue of education. I think Joanne spoke about this very, very well a little bit earlier on. Arilyn touched on this as well. So did Thomas in other ways. You've got adults who need to be educated about the rights of children. You've got media who need to be educated on the depiction of children, and you've got children, of course, who need to be educated on their own rights and their media freedoms in the country and how those can be exercised. What is the holistic level of education that in your view needs to happen, Sudarshan?
Well, I thank you, Joanne. I think it's a broad understanding that the media and nothing is binary. The media are not some sort of nefarious negative source of a platform for cyberbullying and a platform for, all sorts of unsavory ideas. That the media is neither is the media this font of pure encyclopedic knowledge and it's just this amazing source that can change everything. I think we need to look at it as both. So the education needs to focus on the power of media and the power of good of media and the opportunities it provides to shape tolerance, understanding, empathy, responsibility, and rights. So while we've heard a lot this afternoon about the importance of rights of children, it's also about the responsibilities of children, about children taking a stance against bullying, against prejudice, against all sorts of negativities that affect all of us as society. So the education, be it at school, be it in communities, be it on platforms like this, need to always look at media as a partner around this because it's indispensable. Whether it's social media or so-called traditional media, it's part of our existence. It shapes how we function as human beings these days, the majority of humanity. So let's understand media in all its complexity, and let's use the positives to amplify the good work and challenge the negative aspects of media that are out there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our entire panel for your insights into that. And I wish there'd been a little bit more time to pick your brains because you've covered this topic so comprehensively. Perhaps we'll have more time to discuss this in the future with you on another occasion. Thank you very much for participating in that discussion. Let me invite Jared Simmond now. He's going to speak to us. He's the CEO of VMLY&R South Africa. Jared oversees the inner workings of the agency, managing all departments from the business, HR, and operational point of view. He founded his company in 1995 and went on to co-found 3 more businesses. He also co-founded Cambriant, one of the businesses that later merged to become Native. Native eventually joined the VML network as Native VML, paving the way for what would eventually become VMLY&R South Africa. Thank you for your time today. Jared, over to you.
Sure, thanks. Okay, so bit of a change of pace maybe. So William asked me to talk about what are the next big things, next big technology trends that we need to keep our eye on and worry about. Can everybody see my screen just to check? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Jared.
Okay, great. So, so one of the things I do and have done for most of my career is work in the internet space, which has turned out to be a fortuitous place to be in terms of the times that we're in. And so this year has certainly given us a lot of opportunity to think about what technology can and can't do for us, but what's next and what do we need to pay attention to next, and how will that affect our lives? So, so the first point, the most important point I want to make is that digital and online are not fixtures. They are constantly changing, and they change in enormous ways. And we have to ensure that we keep up with those changes as companies, as citizens, as civil society, or all the power will lie with the providers of the tech. I notice I have a typo. But the providers of the tech, the big tech companies that are worth trillions now of dollars, have an inordinate amount of power, and we've allowed them to gain that power on our watch over the last 25 years. And partly because we're not paying close enough attention to what is going on, to what the products are, and to what the technologies are. We all know that that we depend on and need and rely on and love in many ways the technologies that we have access to. But there is a kind of Faustian bargain going on here where we're exchanging our privacy and our sovereignty over our own lives and our own minds to get it. And so we have to pay careful attention to that. So the three trends I want to talk about in the next 10 minutes. So the first one is 5G. So 5G does not cause COVID-19. It is simply the next generation of mobile internet, and it is a radical improvement in speed and internet performance. So if you look at this table, back in 1997, we had GPRS, which was the first kind of internet we had on our phones, and you could do 50 kilobits per second on that. Edge in 1998 went up to 250 kilobits, 3G up to 384 kilobits, and 4G, as you can see the jump there from 384 kilobits to 150 megabits per second. It's a massive, massive jump between 3G and 4G. And if you still ever roam into a 3G area, you can see that difference very viscerally. But look at what 5G gives us. 6,400 megabits per second at the top end. You don't have to worry about what a megabit per second is to understand that that is an unbelievably fast transfer speed. Look at the length of time it would take to download an 800 meg movie, which is a movie in normal definition. It would have taken you a day and a half back in 1997. By 4G times, it would take you 43 seconds. And with 5G, it would take you 1 second. Now, not everybody's going to get the full capacity of 5G dedicated to them. Service providers will split that up when they sell it. But regardless, it's an absolutely mammoth change in the speeds of connectivity you're going to experience on your devices. So the only way for people to get speeds like this up till now is fixed blind fiber in their home or office. And this is true high-speed internet in your device. So why is this important? Let's look at the good parts of this. From an education point of view, it's going to, in theory, make full HD video available to everybody. Interactive high bandwidth apps are also no longer going to be a problem. For schools that are covered by 5G, everyone will have access to that. We will become a very vibrant part of the online gaming community. Believe it or not, 2.7 billion people play games on Earth today. Only 377 million of those are in Middle East and Africa. 5G is going to put the best online gaming within reach of all of us, and it makes Africa competitive in this burgeoning space. Internet of Things, so connecting your fridge to the internet, I like to explain it as, but it's non-computing computer devices. It's not a browser, it's not a phone, it's not a tablet. It's all the other devices we connect. 5G makes it possible for us to connect everything we want to connect to the internet without crashing the network. Remote working has obviously never been more important, and I've noticed a lot of people struggling with remote working from a bandwidth point of view. 5G pretty much makes that a thing of the past. You'll be able to seamlessly participate in video and work. Medicine, so high-speed access for accurate remote consultation, diagnosis, and treatment. And finally, connection, the need we have to connect with others. You know, the experience of being on a video call that's jumpy and falling apart is a very disconnecting one. And so fast bandwidth is the heart of solving that. There are some concerns that come with this that need to be thought about. Once again, not COVID-19. So digital inequality. So obviously mobile providers see this as their next big cash cow. So will it really reach underprivileged people, and will it just widen the inequality gap? Disinformation is a massive problem already, and more people connected to the internet, reading more stuff, opens up the possibility for an enormous amount more disinformation. Porn, I see, sorry, a mistake on my slide here, but I'll just talk to this. Is porn is a pernicious feature of the internet, and high-speed video is what the porn networks have been waiting for, to get more porn in more hands more of the time. Screen time is a big concern. The amount of time we will spend locked to our screens and disengaged from the people around us. And finally, cost. 5G is not going to be cheap. And there are lots more transceivers that are needed because the range is much less. And so there will potentially be cost implications. And we know that the cellular industry doesn't have the best track record of passing on good cost to consumers. Okay, so next up, augmented reality. So what is this? Augmented reality is a digital overlay onto the real world, either via a phone or a tablet screen or with special glasses. So let's just have a look at some of the amazing AR applications that are already available out there. That's just a simple example of AR in action. You can see what I mean by an overlay. Here's a slightly more serious use for medical purposes or medical education. Now this is a real application. This isn't like, a bad Hollywood movie from the 90s. This is a real application that exists, that you can install and you can actually play around with right now. Bear in mind what you're seeing here is looking through a phone or looking through a headset. And one of the most interesting companies I've seen is a company called Mojo. They are trying to make an AR contact lens. You put it in your eye and you will have a heads-up display wherever you go. So this is a whole new way to use information to improve almost anything you do. It is as fundamental a change as a web browser was to us or an iPad was to us. From an education point of view, we can literally experience rather than watching things. We can see visual history lessons. We can look at virtual surgeries. It will provide job support, so it will provide amazing additional capability within your job. If you're sitting in a meeting and you're able to read information, access information at the click of a button, and it's right there in your heads-up display. Obviously, incredible new entertainment. I've heard it described as moving from making stories to building worlds. So entertainment will become something you walk through and participate in. From a communication point of view, it's going to essentially put a version of a person across the world in your house with you. So if you think about that 3D skeleton we just saw, imagine a version of Zoom where you're looking through some kind of glasses and you're seeing a 3D version of the person you're interacting with in your room with you. So those are just four, basic ideas around AR. And most of these there are demos or actually finished applications that are already out there. So what is the possible problem here with these technologies? I think, first of all, it's computing becomes invisible. You no longer know what somebody's accessing or whether they're accessing something. You will be talking to someone, interacting with them, and they could be, reading or looking at anything online while they're busy looking at you. Attention deficit, phones are bad enough. Imagine when your chat notifications are popping up in front of your eyeballs all day long. Will access to information become even a bigger issue? Because if your job or your interaction with society or your way of getting around or moving up in society is based on access to information because it's augmenting your life experience, could access to information become a massive new problem for us. And a big change to social dynamics. We don't know what the unforeseen psychological consequences could be of having technology like this, and tech people are terrible at thinking about that. And we really need a whole new legal framework to think about this new way of managing technology. And hopefully we won't wake up in 20 years to find that someone has essentially stolen, a whole bunch of more data from us, because the intimacy of putting a computer in your eye is quite dramatic. Okay, the last one is deepfakes. You may have heard or seen these. It's using artificial intelligence to accurately mimic a person's image and speech to have them say things that they never said. This is a huge breakthrough based on computing power, because we've all seen Hollywood movies where you've had animated people that look lifelike, but the reality about all of those animations that they're rendered over many, many weeks or months, and they don't quite look real. Deepfakes use machine learning to come up with an algorithm that makes the person look indistinguishable from reality. So look at this one, for example.
All Labour members and supporters to consider people before privilege, and back Boris Johnson to continue as our Prime Minister. A Prime Minister that works for the many.
So that is a very scary video, because it does not look fake at all. It looks 100% real, and obviously that isn't actually Jeremy Corbyn giving a shout out to Boris Johnson. Here's another famous one done by Michael.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the second place, or how about this? Simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele.
So that is Jordan Peele doing an Obama accent. But again, that video is very difficult to tell. It would be very difficult to tell that video is fake. So deepfakes have the potential to be fun, practical jokes, but in a serious sense, are actually terrifying, because in political parties, the ability to spread disinformation is huge. And right now, in a post-fact world, it doesn't matter if it comes out the video is fake, because there will still be people who believe that it's true. Celebrities are obvious target here. If you think about being able to cast a celebrity in your home video without their permission, using just a simple piece of software, people attacking and damaging each other's reputations is a huge worry. Again, there's already apps where you can put in the picture of somebody and it will render it without their clothes on, using deepfake algorithms. So, imagine the kinds of deepfake videos that you can make with that sort of technology. And lastly, every parent's worst nightmare is their child being bullied at school. Imagine what the most nefarious kids will get up to using deepfake technology against their classmates. And I'm sorry to tell you, but all of this technology already is available as an app on an ordinary phone. I mean, this is not science fiction. This is something that exists today. So yeah, I hope that was interesting. That was a bit of a whirlwind view of 3 really important technology trends that are right here with us. These are not 10 years away. They're maybe a year away. In a year's time, they will be completely commonplace. And yeah, it's something that I think in the media world, we really have to pay very careful attention to. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. I think our kids, that's exactly the kind of technology our children are going to be using. And it's very important for us as parents and teachers and their guides, essentially, to be aware of all of that. So thank you for that, Jared. So to close, let me bring in the Director of Media Monitoring Africa, William Byrd. He's a familiar face and voice in the media landscape, commenting on all sorts of issues related to media coverage and journalism in South Africa. William, thank you for promoting this important discussion.
Hello, you nearly caught me there. I was still busy doing my last tweet, trying furiously to
keep up with this. That's the problem with this virtual world. Is
Thanks for dressing up for us as well, Will.
Thanks for messing up that process.
Thanks for dressing up for us.
No, well, yes, of course. I mean, only the best. I just wanted to say thank you so much. I was presenting to our regulator just before the session started, so I missed the first few minutes, but I wanted to just say thank you so much to our panelists. I thought their input was excellent. So many lovely thought-provoking points, lessons learned, things that we can take. Yeah, I mean, it's towards the end of the year, and I was feeling a little bit bleak before this, and now I'm feeling thrilled and energized and excited, and also probably a large degree of terrified as we went through a fascinating panel. And then I thought the children's videos were just classic as always. You know, they have ways of things that is just always so enlightening. And then to wrap it up with Jared and that superb whirlwind tour of things, I'm still trying to take in some of them into my brain. So there's a lot of stuff that we've got to think about. And as always, a huge thanks to the fabulous Joanne for giving us your time and energy and support to this event. So thank you very much to our speakers. Please keep an eye on our social media handle. We'll be posting some of the clips from these things as well as other cool content. Today is the start of our Media Freedom Festival. We were hoping to actually do a bit of a quiz, but I think we've just run out of time now, and we've expended everyone's time and energy a little bit too far. But Wednesday is our next event. We'll be looking at xenophobia and racism online. And some superb speakers and fascinating insights to that. So if you haven't already got yourself ready for Wednesday, please do so. But thank you again to everyone for your time and energy and your commitment, and to all of your work to help make our democracy that much better. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.